Recording. Okay. So, just as kind of a reminder, sometimes it's just hard to remember what past you was thinking. So it's not even that I'm unhappy with this animation. It's more like there are different times when you get to this point that you need to do a revision pass. And sometimes just digging through the curves and trying to remember what you were thinking or what you had already done is more work than just kind of taking a couple of steps back. So I'm going to show you a couple of methods of taking a couple of steps back, no pun intended, with this piece. So one of the benefits of of doing this is you are probably a better animator now than you were the first time you worked on this shot. Even if it was just a few weeks ago. Like, you've probably improved, or you're just coming to it with a different perspective, and so you have the opportunity now to make it better. So let's say, like, even this first pose, I'm not unhappy with this pose, but maybe I can see a way of making it better or making it stronger. I've already set up a quick button to select all my controls. I'll show you kind of quickly how I did that for mine. All of them are under this controls tab. Again, highlight everything. And then in my script editor, it was my last 2 lines of script. And just drag those up there and create a button, right? So it's going to be very important to have that button. I have to be able to select all of my controls, because all of my controls in some way or another affect how my character gets into each of these poses, right? But you'll see that when I have them all selected, my timeline's a mess, right? Like, look at all those key ticks. Some of them are green. What did I do to them? This is actually a thing you can do inside of Maya. You can change the color of certain key ticks, and that allows you to, like, sort of categorize stuff. If you're like, oh, all of my breakdowns are green and all of my keyframes are red, you can do that. Or you could say, hey, this section in the middle here, I want all of those keyframes to be green, but the 2 end caps are red. So don't sweat that much. But what I'm really looking at here is, like, if I needed to change something, that's just messy, right? That's hard to understand, right? And so let's say what I needed to change was this, or something I was unhappy with, was this step from, let's say from here, like say frame 31 to frame 60, right? Everything of going from, like, he's getting ready to reach for the wall with his foot to he's up against the wall. Let's say I'm unhappy with that transition. Well, if I have all of my controls selected, I can hit S on those 2 keyframes, right? And then I can delete this section in between. Now, that means everything before this keyframe is preserved. Everything after this keyframe is preserved. And so now all I got to do is 31 through 60, and I can just make this section better. Now, right now it's not better, right? There's nothing there. But that's 30 frames that I can just reanimate, and if I'm just focusing on that, I may be able to do that pretty quickly, right? I can start setting better or even stronger or cleaner keyframes, right? Select everything, hit S, maybe select everything, hit S, there we go. Maybe my foot control here, I want to borrow from 31. So we keep that foot there. Maybe this foot control here. I'll borrow from the end. And so now we get this reach across here, and I can sort of lead with the character's butt a little bit. Do like something like this. Roll up on the toe. Sort of angle the foot. And I can just start recreating this breakdown that I need to get this motion to happen. And so even though I still have a long ways to go, I can just sort of still start fixing these little sections here to make this animation even stronger. I want to maybe add some more drag in here. Start leading with the hands a little bit more up against this wall. And so now maybe that's feeling a little better than what I had before. It's not really that I had any problems with what I had before, but this is just sort of an example of it, right? So this is a way to patch just an individual section, right? Let's say you have one section that you're like, that's just all messed up, I can do better than that. This is how you can fix that without having to damage your entire animation and without having to spend forever digging through curves and figuring out what you were thinking, right? So there's another form of cleaning this up that you may want to do, which is you may just want to take your entire shot back to blocking or blocking plus. So that's a little bit more extreme, but like again, maybe you just feel more confident in the graph editor now than you did when you first did this shot, right? And we could do that manually just by going through here and sort of finding our keyframes on this timeline. Where are all my keyframes? Oh, back here. So we could do this manually just by going through and saying, okay, that's a keyframe. I'll hit S there. Whoa. I'll hit S there, and maybe that's a keyframe where the foot contacts the ground on frame 14. I'll hit S and then delete this section out. Right, so that's one way we can do it, but there's another way we can do it just to not have to worry quite as much about accidentally not setting a keyframe or something like that, which is we can bake this information out onto every key. And that sounds like not a good idea, but let me just show you why I would do this. So I select my rig. I can go to Edit, Keys, Bake Simulation. I know this isn't a simulation, but what it's going to do is for every curve, for every control, I just set a keyframe on every frame, right? And so now I just know that everything is keyed, and I can just wipe out the sections of keys I don't need anymore, right? So, like frame 1 is my keyframe, and frame, like I said, 14, is that where it is? Yeah, 15, 14 is my keyframe. I just wipe out 2 through 13, right? And then my next keyframe is probably right about here, frame 31. And just wipe out this. Again, one of the cool things about this is I can choose to leave breakdowns. Like if I like this breakdown on 22, I can leave that breakdown on 22, and again, delete this section through here. Now, one of the reasons I might want to do this, let's say, that's our other key. I'm just going to show you this, get rid of a few of these. So one of the reasons I might want to do this is because now I'm back to the point where we were at blocking, where all I was thinking about was making strong poses. So if you're looking at your animation and you're like, my poses aren't very strong, this is one of the ways that we could start to fix that, right? Because now I only have to worry about 4 poses to make those stronger. I have to worry about this one, this one, this one, this one, right? And I can just make changes to my first keyframe, and again, I'm making my entire pose stronger at the blocking level, so I can start transitioning, into these next poses and making each of those stronger as well. I know that probably sounds like antithetical to you, to what you you think you should be doing. Like basically I'm like, oh, you want to make this better? Let's go back a few steps. And you're like, no, Greg, I want to get closer to the end, not further away from the end, right? The problem with that is like, I think you've probably experienced this already. Like trying to make a animation that's just meh, like that you're not super excited about or feeling like super confident in, trying to make that good is really hard. But when you have an animation that's like from the very beginning is feeling solid, feeling like appealing, those go way quicker. Like some of the animations that are in my demo reel were probably some of the ones that went the easiest for me. It's like when you get strong poses, polishing in between strong poses is not nearly as hard as polishing in between mediocre poses. And so by going back to this step, we're improving all of the elements of it to make our cleanup pass, our splining, our polish, all of that, less of a fight, right? It's just going to happen easier. So I'm going to undo a few steps. Back to before I baked all of this. There we go. Okay. So there's another, we're going to get into cleaning up the curves and some of the techniques for cleaning up curves later. Right now what we're trying to do is step back to the foundational level and how do we make these more appealing, or how do we make substantial changes to your animation without destroying your animation, right? And so this is a tool that some of you may have played around with before. How many of you have used animation layers before? Anybody? Ryan, kind of. That's right. So, I guess I feel like I've mentioned them in different classes, but it's always in that sort of like offhanded, oh, I guess you could fix it with animation layers. And I wasn't aware how revolutionary this would appear to some people, because I just thought I'd talked about it enough already. I'm going to show you how to use animation layers today, and like literally my last class was like freaking out about this, because this is a completely different way of thinking about animation. So to do it, I'm going to go ahead and just start with a new scene. This one's already kind of there, so I'll use this scene, but I am going to, actually no, I'll do a new scene. So very quickly, I'm going to make this object some simple animation on it. Okay, so S, move that up. S, highlight these keys. Actually, that's not right. So I'll highlight these keys really quickly. Stop it. There we go. Copy. Paste. We'll just paste a few of these in there. Just so I have this box sort of bouncing forever, right? And just because I can't not, I'm going to go ahead and go to my graph editor and sort of fix these tangents just a little bit. So I'll grab all of those and set those to linear, and then grab all of those, break them. I don't know if it'll let me do this right. Let's see. Sorry, I know this isn't the exciting part. Okay. So now I have this box that's just bouncing for a long period of time. So we've already learned a lot about the graph editor. So you're not going to be surprised that like we can go into this graph editor, we can make changes to certain curves to change this animation, right? So let's say I wanted this animation to go to bounce instead of right here in the middle. I wanted it to bounce from one side of the screen to the other. I go to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor. That's probably my translate. Let's do translate Z. And so you are aware that I can delete these, go out here to the end, move that in one direction, move this in the other direction, set those to linear, right? And now my animation sort of slowly bounces forward, right? And I can adjust that and make it more dramatic, right? And so that's not hard to do something like that, but what if I needed it to like zigzag through some cones? Or what if I needed it to go in a path that is not a very specific, like what if I wanted this bouncing box to look like it's wandering around, right? Well, suddenly my translate Y and my rotate and my translate X and my translate Z and my rotate Y, all of those things have to come into play, and I have to fight with the graph editor for hours, right? I'm going to show you how to do that in like less than a minute. So let me undo this stuff I just did. Control Z, get that back there to where it's flat, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my layers channel here. So you're used to display layers where we can put stuff into layers and hide them or turn them on and off or whatever. What we're looking at is animation layers, which are right here beside it, right? And currently that is empty. So to put something in an animation layer, we have to have it selected just like a regular layer, right? And so I'm going to click this little circle on the plane button right here in the animation layers, and you're going to see that it's going to create two layers, okay? The first one is the base layer, and the base layer is where we had that animation, right? And if I choose animation layer 1, look what happens to my timeline. There's no keyframes on this, right? So I can start animating on this layer, and it's going to be an additive animation layer. It's not going to change anything on that previous layer. I'm just going to I get an entirely new timeline that I can do stuff with, right? A whole new set of keyframes to work with. So if I wanted to do that, I could go to frame 1, move my box over here, and hit S, right? Well, now my bouncing is over there instead of in the center, right? And if at the end of it, I want this box to be over here, I can hit S, and now my box moves across this way, right? But if I wanted to do something really weird with this, like if I wanted it to get to like right here and sort of start to bounce over in this direction, over to here. Well, maybe that's not necessarily the right way of doing that. Let me do like that, there. That wasn't very smooth at all. Let's delete that one. There we go. And then over to here, I could rotate it some more. Here, it can go wider. And maybe over here, I could have it swing wide out this way. And from here, I could have it started pointing in that direction, right? So now just by setting a few of these keyframes, like on this animation layer, we'll call this path layer, right? I just did some animation from above to make it sort of travel in this path, right? And so there's only like 5 or 6 keyframes on this layer, while all of my bouncing animation is still on my base layer, right? And so what I'm getting as a result on here is a combination of those 2 sets of curves. In fact, if I go to my graph editor and look at this, you'll see that I have my base animation keyframes, and I have this path layer animation keyframes, which is completely different, right? I get 2 sets of curves out of this. So the cool thing about this, there's a lot of cool things about this, actually. I have a bad habit of saying that. So one of the neat things about this is I can turn this layer off, right? I can uncheck this little, or I can click this little mute layer button, and suddenly my box is just bouncing in the middle there again, right? Or, even more interestingly, I can turn this layer down, right? If that's too much motion along that path, I could do 50% of those keyframes, right? And it's going to be a smaller version of that. And that weight that I'm adding to that layer, that is keyframeable. I can set keyframes to animate that from 0 to 1, right? So let me show you why this is beneficial in making a change to your animation, right? Let's say this was the animation you had, and the art director comes to you and says, wait, in this, I want it to bounce on this as well, right? And what we get now is that, where it bounces through it, right? Let's put it in a little more clear location. Maybe like right here, right? So let's say that's what, let's try that. That's where the art director wants the box to jump on it, not through it, right? Well, that's a lot of keyframes to start editing and curves to start changing. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my box and I'm going to add yet another layer. Now again, all of these are additive, so they're going to build on top of each other. So I'll do this as correction. And so I'm going to go to the point where this is correct still yet, which is maybe like right there. Actually, let's go back a little further. Let's go to like right there, right? And hit S. And then I want it to jump up onto the box for, let's say, this hit, and then I want it to land like somewhere else, like a little further away here, right? So maybe I'll go to the end. I still want it to end there, but like right here, maybe I want it to hit just a little further away. And then here, yeah, that's okay. Wait, is that? So I want it to hit there. So I'm just going to sort of change some of these. That. And then right here, on this impact right here, that's where I'm just going to raise that curve up to there. Get this keyframe there. And then this next one, I want it to land on it again. So I could probably just copy this one and paste it right 70-ish. Close enough. Nope, I am way off. It needs to be 71. And so now this is what I'm getting out of that. I probably made that a little more complicated than was necessary by having those extra bounces and stuff in it. But like, these are just a quick set of keys that I'm adding to this to correct the animation. Let's say your punch animation from your game, right? Let's say you decided you don't want the character punching while standing up. You want them to do like a low, like kidney punch or something like that. Like that literally could be 3 keyframes and you have a completely new animation, right? One of the other elements this can be used for is you can use this to push existing points in your animation. So let's say you don't want to strip this back down to your blocking, but you do want to push some of your poses. This is a way that you could go in and like push the exaggeration on a certain pose without messing up the rest of the animation. So once we get this though, we have these 3 layers now that each have curves in them, right? And like that can get really confusing because if I tried to like shift some of these keyframes on this layer, I'm just shifting them on this layer. I'm not shifting them on the other layers, right? And so that could easily break stuff. And plus, like, sometimes like offsetting, stuff like that, it's a little annoying to have multiple layers, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake all of this down to 1 layer. And the way you do that is just highlight all 3 of your layers, right click, and under merge layers, I'm going to go to my settings, and I'm going to make sure I have Smart Bake turned on. If you don't have Smart Bake turned on, it's just going to put a keyframe on every frame. But what this is going to do is it's going to take all of that animation and merge it down into 1 layer. And it's going to generate curves that account for all of that motion, right? So now all of that is just on 1 set of curves, right? So you can see my bouncing, like where it bounced up higher there. This is sort of the path that my box was taking. So all of this stuff now is in 1 set of curves that I can continue to polish, right? And I personally do still feel like it needs some polish, like stuff like this. I'm not always happy with that overshoot on the tangents. But this is still a manageable amount of keyframes. So let me show you how we would use this in our character. So I will go back to Willie. Willie's his name. I've selected all of the controls, right? Under animation layers, I'm going to create a new animation layer. So there's my base animation with all of the Willie animation. And then this new animation layer is just an empty layer that I can add additional keyframes to. So I'll call this push layer because I'm just going to use this to exaggerate the animation or to make it a little bit more clear. So first thing, I want to set if I just set a keyframe here without changing anything, that will sort of say whatever's happening on the lower layers, I'm not adding anything to it on this keyframe, right? And so that gives us sort of a homing location to get back to, if that makes sense. And maybe the same for the end. I may be completely happy with where we are at the end, so I'll go ahead and hit S there as well, just so I have a keyframe on all of that. So areas I may want to push. For example, well, this first pose may be a good example of an area I want to push, but maybe this second pose on frame 15 is not. So I'll go ahead and set a keyframe on 15, but on frame 1, I'll go ahead and push this. Exaggerate it a little bit more. Reach with this arm. Maybe clear up that silhouette just a little bit more. All right, so maybe something like this. And now we're just getting those 2 keyframes and it transitions back into my sort of my standard pose, right? Similar to what I had before, maybe I'm okay with this pose and what? Tell me that. Why or not what? Yes, it is. This rig does have some issues, so let me go ahead and increment and save that, and then reopen it. Let me close this down and reopen it. That should be working. I don't know what's not. Yes, that's what I wanted. Character mode. File, open scene. Okay. Back to my animation layers. What are you talking? Okay, I do not know why it's not finding my controls, but I'm gonna make it again. Oh, apparently I renamed something somehow. That makes more sense. There we go, Bill. All right. So got all that selected, hit S. So let's say I wanted to really exaggerate how much he straightens up when he hits the wall here. I can put a keyframe there. And put a keyframe at the end of that as well, so probably about 80. And then I'll just go back to normal right through here, 95. And so I can straighten up very straight on this wall. Straighten them out like this. So he feels a little bit more nervous about the wall now, and I can right click on that and say copy, paste that on 80, and then he just transitions into that. And then maybe my transition here, let's say I wanted to push this pose again for more exaggeration. Set another keyframe there. Get something like this. And so again, all of these are just you can see the number of keyframes I have here. It's less than 10, and I'm making some pretty big changes to the animation. Maybe the point where he bounces up in the air here, maybe I would select everything, have a keyframe on the ground, have a keyframe when he hits the ground there, and then just this spot up in the air, I could take him higher. All right. Oh, that's interesting. Let's try it like that instead. But maybe squish him more. Right, what if we did something like that? There we go. So all of this is just altering with a non-destructive layer my base layer that is underneath. Right. So if I hit play, you can see he goes much straighter on the wall and pops up in the air higher, hits the ground maybe a little, pretty much the same. But so these are subtle changes that I've made to the animation without actually even touching the base animation, right? I haven't had to edit anything in there in order to get this a little bit more polished. So a couple of other little things you can do is if you wanted to add subtle texture to this. So for example, let's say during this stretch here, I wanted him to have like sort of this nervous look around, right? Like he's looking back and forth around the scene to make sure like he's not, waking somebody up or whatever. I'll add a new layer. We'll just call this look. And I can set a keyframe on 95 and probably like 140. And then I could just very easily go in here and get this like subtle look from side to side. Copy that one. Paste it. Back over to here. Copy. Paste. And then back up to here. And so I'm not really changing very much. I just added a layer where he's kind of looking around. And so we can subtly start to layer animations in here. Now, my 2 cents, like when it's all said and done, it's really hard to get stuff like overlapping action, all of this stuff to feel like it's flowing cohesively if it's not in one set of curves. So I usually bake it down or merge it down. How you decide to work is kind of up to you. And actually, this isn't even me suggesting that you should do this. This is me saying that this is a thing that exists, right? And everybody uses it to a different level in the way that they animate. Does anybody remember Miguel Caffey? He graduated last semester. He repeated character animation, and the second time through, he started working this way on everything. So it was stuff like his character's eye blinks were on a different layer. I use this a lot for lip sync. I will do a very generic, or not generic, I'll do very basic face shapes and all of the lip sync on one layer, and then I can add another layer and just push the emotion in it, right? So the way an M shape looks when you're angry versus when you're happy is 2 different poses. And I was doing I'll do the emotion on one layer while I do the lip sync on another layer sometimes. And again, the cool part about all of this is that you can scale it up and down, and it's not destructive. If I change my mind and I like the original one better, I just go back to the original one. In this case, I actually think I like this one better, like the new version that I've kind of pushed. So I want to. The point of this class, or the point of this sort of polished lecture, is to give you options on how to make your animation better. The same way that like in animation fundamentals, you probably dreaded going into the graph editor. I don't want you dreading having to fix a scene, because that means you'll postpone doing it and it just won't get better, right? So hopefully these tools will give you something to be working on. So I know a portion of you are, and most of the people who are in portfolio are doing this project as the revision project. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the milestones for that. I want to give you the same like 5 criteria grading thing. So we're going to just pick a couple of milestones to hit. And one of them, I think, is to take whatever animation you're working on right now, whatever animation you're using for this project, and have your improved or like ready to polish or ready to spline version of that by this time next week. So Tuesday of next week, either whether you're going to take it back to blocking or at blocking plus and just pull it back down to the keyframes, whether you're going to use the layers, whatever it is you're planning on doing, let's aim at being there by Tuesday of next week. And that will be one of the sort of milestone elements that we look at in the rubric. So what I would like you to do is I'd be interested in seeing a before and after. So edit together like the old shot, how it was before you fixed it, and the new shot where you are now. So the next pass we're going to do from there is another splining pass to address all of the weight shifts and everything with sort of the root and the core of the character, the torso, the head, the hips, and the feet, right? Sort of like that, everything without the character's arms. In fact, we're going to do it without the character's arms. We're going to hide the character's arms so you can see how that looks. And then, so that's the next one that we'll be starting on from there. So, any questions about any of this?
Is there a rule sheet?
Hey, there is. I wonder where it is. Oh, here it is. All right. Good. Good question. I'll go and pass that around. Thank you. Anything about the layers? About any of the cleanup process? Anything that sort of confusing? How many of you think you may actually use the layers as part of this? Right? Yeah. Like, it's revolutionary to some and like meh others. Some people like start using it and they're like, that's great, I may use that someday, but not today. And some people are like, this completely changes everything. Like, I now understand how to tackle my shots. And I think that's one of the hard parts about being a teacher is I don't always know what's going to be the revolutionary thing to you. Hopefully this is helpful though. I think that at the very least it gives you some more options on how to change your animation other than going into the graph editor and tweaking it one like curve, like one tiny keyframe at a time. You can make big sweeping changes on this, and if they don't work, you just delete them. It's not a big deal, right? Okay, cool. So anybody in the character animation 1 class have any questions about the projects? Okay, so for that class, I would say I am kind of not micromanaging you. If you're doing the pantomime acting, I would expect you all already have your reference in Maya. How many of you have started on blocking on that? Blocking, sure. So I'm not going to have the milestones like we did before. I will say sometime in the next week or so, we're going to have a one of those days where we upload it to Sync Sketch and give everybody feedback. On the day that we do that, I would expect that's probably either late next week or some early next week or late next week, somewhere in that time, just to give you enough time to give some feedback on it. And I'll kind of look at the schedule a little closer before next class period and come up with a little bit of a better timeline for that. But that will, if you're kind of wanting to hit the targets, I would plan on being done with your blocking by early next week. Like this week should probably be your blocking pass, and then next week you're into splining for that. Or blocking to blocking plus this week, and you may still be doing a little bit of breakdowns, but I want you to have as much time as possible in splining. And hopefully you're able to get some good reference on that. So, otherwise, the rest of the class is yours. I don't have a lot else I'm going to cover on this. If you have questions, I'll be around to the rest of the class. I like this race to get their hand up first. 1 and 2. And so I'll just be hanging around, helping you with any questions you have. And all right, have a good one. I'll be here. And I'll remember to stop the YouTube video this time. The other one has about 30 minutes of silence at the end of it, of actually just this wall. Stop.